The dog was still shaking when Jane pressed it against her chest. It was 6:47 in the morning, and the loading dock behind Harrington Tower smelled the way it always did. Diesel exhaust, wet cardboard, and the faint chemical sweetness of the cleaning solution she mixed herself every shift. Jane had been on her knees for 4 minutes, which she knew because she had been counting, because every minute she stayed, crouched behind the industrial bins with a bleeding, trembling animal pressed to her uniform, was a minute she was not mopping the executive lobby before the 7 a.m. walkthrough. Mr. Voss did the walkthrough himself every morning. He had never once found a smear on the marble floor. She had made sure of that for 3 years, but the dog had looked at her. That was the problem. It had looked at her from beneath the dumpster with one eye swollen shut and the other wide open and completely certain the way animals look when they have already decided to trust you and are simply waiting for you to catch up. It was a small thing, mostly white with one brown ear, the kind of dog that belonged in a photograph on someone's refrigerator. Someone had tied a red collar around its neck so tightly she could see where the skin had begun to fold over the edge. Someone had loved this dog, or had owned it, which was not always the same thing. She pulled the collar loose. The dog exhaled like it had been holding that breath for days. Put it down, she told herself. You cannot afford what comes next. She knew exactly what came next because she had done the math already, the way she always did, the way she had learned to do since her mother's diagnosis 14 months ago. The chemotherapy was $3,200 a month after insurance. Her salary covered $2,800 of it. The remaining $400 she covered by taking a second shift at a hotel laundry 3 nights a week, which left her approximately 6 hours of sleep on a good night and 4 on a bad one. There was no budget line for a dog. There was no budget line for anything that was not her mother's survival. She picked the dog up anyway. She would figure it out. She always figured it out. What she did not figure out was that Richard Harrington was watching. She did not know him yet. That was the thing about Richard Harrington in the city he practically owned. Almost no one knew what he actually looked like. He appeared in the financial press occasionally, always in the same kind of photograph. Dark suit, controlled expression, a man who had learned early that showing nothing was the safest form of armor. He was 41 years old and had been described variously as visionary, ruthless, private, and difficult. His son Daniel was 7 and lived with Richard full-time since the divorce 2 years ago, and was the only person alive who had ever seen Richard Harrington cry. That morning, Richard was not in a dark suit. He was sitting on an overturned milk crate beside the loading dock, wearing a gray canvas jacket that had belonged to a man named Earl, who sold it to him for $8 outside a shelter on Clement Street. The jacket smelled of cigarettes and something older and harder to name. His shoes were wrong, too worn on the left heel, the laces replaced with a different color. He had not shaved in 4 days. He was holding a paper cup of coffee he had not touched, and he was watching the city wake up, the way he did every few months when the distance between his life and the lives of the people who worked inside his buildings became a weight he needed to put down temporarily. He had done this since he was 19. Since the winter, he had slept in a Pontiac outside Fresno with his younger brother and learned that cold, real cold, was not a temperature, but a sound, the sound of your own breathing in a car that wouldn't start and a night that wouldn't end. He watched the woman in the green uniform pull the dog from under the dumpster. He watched her check it with hands that were practiced and gentle. He watched her face, not pity, not sentiment, but something more serious than both. A decision being made in real time, with full knowledge of the cost. He almost said something. He didn't. He just watched her carry the dog inside through the service entrance, tucking it under her arm like a secret. He finished his coffee. It had gone cold. The dog's name, as far as Jane was concerned, was Not a Dog I Can Keep. She settled it in the custodial closet on the 4th floor, the one nobody used since. They moved the supply inventory to the basement on a folded moving blanket she found behind the freight elevator. She cleaned the wound on its flank with diluted antiseptic and gave it half of her breakfast, which was a hard-boiled egg and 4 crackers. The dog ate with the focused, grateful urgency of something that had learned not to expect seconds. One day, she told me, "I'll find you a home by tonight." She believed this the way she believed a lot of things she needed to believe in order to keep moving. The marble in the executive lobby was spotless by 7:03. Mr. Voss arrived at 7-Eleven, walked the full length of the floor, looked down exactly twice, and said nothing, which was the closest he ever came to a compliment. Gerald Voss had managed the operations of Harrington Tower for 11 years. He was 53, trim in the way of men who ate carefully not for health, but for control, with silver hair swept back from a face that was always slightly more pleasant than it needed to be. He was charming in the elevator with executives and dismissive in the stairwell with cleaners. And he had learned long ago that the people who mattered never overlapped with the people who didn't. He called the custodial staff "my team" in meetings and never learned their last names. He was currently running a scheme that had been running for 3 years and had netted him, conservatively, $340,000. The scheme was not complicated, which was why it had lasted. Harrington Properties managed maintenance contracts for 14 buildings. Voss had a verbal agreement with a contractor named Pillar Services they overbilled by 30%. Voss approved the invoices, and every quarter a payment moved through a shell LLC into an account in his brother-in-law's name. It required nothing from Voss except a signature and the confidence that no one beneath him was paying attention and no one above him was looking. He was right about the people above him. He had not considered the people below. Jane heard it by accident. She was returning a floor buffer to the supply corridor on the 7th floor when she heard Voss's voice through the partially open door of the secondary conference room, the one used for vendor meetings, the one with the frosted glass panel that gave the illusion of privacy without actually providing it. She was not trying to listen. She stopped because she heard her own name. "The Jane woman," Voss was saying. "Third floor team. She's been here long enough to develop opinions." "I don't like people who develop opinions." She pressed herself against the corridor wall. Her cart made no sound. She had spent 3 years learning to move without sound in spaces where she was not supposed to be noticed. The other voice was unfamiliar, male, younger, slightly nervous. She identified him later as Kevin Park, Voss's deputy operations manager, 28 years old, recently married, his wife 4 months pregnant with their first child. His work visa tied to his employment status in ways that kept him quiet about many things. "She hasn't said anything," Kevin said. "She saw the invoice discrepancy on the Pillar account," Voss said. "I saw her face when I handed her the recycling from the finance meeting. She looked at the cover sheet. That doesn't mean. It means I want her moved to the night rotation at the warehouse facility. No reason given. If she pushes back, we terminate for performance." A pause. "Gerald, she's got her mother sick, I think. If we terminate her—" "Kevin." Voss's voice dropped into something quieter and therefore colder. "I need to know if you are the kind of person who helps me or the kind of person who becomes a problem, because I have managed this building for 11 years and I have never had a problem I couldn't solve. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The silence that followed lasted 6 seconds. Jane counted them. "Yes," Kevin said. "I understand." She pushed her cart to the service elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. Her hands were completely still. That frightened her more than shaking would have. She thought about it all day. She thought about the $400 gap every month. She thought about her mother in the chair, the specific chair, the blue recliner they had moved into the treatment room because her mother had bad hips, and the clinic chairs were agony. She thought about the look on her mother's face the morning Jane had told her the job was going well. "Don't worry, everything is fine," and had watched relief move across her mother's features like weather. She thought about the Pillar Services account. She had seen the cover sheet for less than 4 seconds. She had a good memory, a precise, photographic, inconvenient memory, and she remembered the numbers. She had run them mentally 3 times since the service elevator. The overbilling was not subtle once you saw it. It was only invisible to people who were not looking. "Stay silent," said the part of her that had spent 14 months doing the math. "You didn't see enough to prove anything. You'll lose the job. You'll lose the insurance. You will lose your mother faster than cancer will take her." "But he knows you saw something," said the other part. "And a man like that does not wait." She was cleaning the executive washroom on the 9th floor when she found the dog. It had followed her. Somehow, impossibly, through fire doors and elevator landings, it had found her. It was sitting outside the washroom door when she opened it, tail moving in a slow, uncertain arc, the one good eye watching her with the same complete, unreasonable certainty it had shown her that morning. She sat down on the corridor floor. The dog climbed into her lap. "You're going to get me fired," she told me. It rested its chin on her knee. She thought about her father. He had been a custodian too, a school custodian for 22 years. In the same district, in the same building. He used to say that the thing about cleaning other people's messes was that you saw everything. You saw what people dropped and what they hid and what they left behind when they thought no one was watching. He said it was not a position of power, but it was a position of truth. He had died when she was 17, before she understood what he meant. She understood now. She pulled out her phone and took 3 photographs of the invoice cover sheet she had photographed earlier, with no plan yet for what to do with them, and one small, specific decision. She would not be moved to the warehouse. She would not be made to disappear. Whatever came next, she was going to face it standing in the place she had earned. The next morning, Voss called her into his office at 8. Kevin Park was there, standing near the window. He did not look at her. Voss explained pleasantly that due to operational restructuring, her position was being transitioned to the warehouse facility across town. The hours were slightly different. The commute would be longer. Her current access would be revoked at the end of shift. "I'd like to understand the reason," Jane said. "Performance optimization," Voss said. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had never once been asked to explain himself and found the experience mildly novel. "It's nothing personal. I have a record of 3 years without a single performance note," she said, the smile tightened by a fraction. "As I said, optimization. I'd like that in writing." The room changed temperature. "Jane." He said her name the way you say a word you're deciding whether to use. "I'd encourage you to consider this practically. You have obligations. I understand. The transition package is generous. I'd like the reason in writing," she said again. Kevin Park shifted his weight by the window. He still did not look at her. Voss's jaw moved once like he was tasting something. Then he reached for his phone. "Security can escort you out at the end of shift with your belongings. We'll mail the documentation." She walked out. She did not shake until she reached the stairwell. Then she took out her phone and sent the 3 photographs to the Harrington Properties Ethics Hotline, the city's contractor oversight board, and one journalist at the Chronicle who had written about city contract fraud 18 months ago and whose email address Jane had found in 6 minutes because she had a precise memory and a library card and a great deal of practice solving problems without resources. Then she went back to work. She cleaned every floor she was assigned. She did it perfectly. At 2:15 p.m., she was summoned to the executive lobby. Voss was waiting for her in front of the reception desk. There were 4 other staff members present, 2 from operations, 1 from HR, 1 she didn't recognize. He had chosen the lobby deliberately. She understood that immediately. He wanted witnesses. He wanted a performance. He told them, in a voice pitched precisely for the room, that a member of the custodial team had been found to have accessed confidential financial documents without authorization, that this was a terminable offense under Section 7.4 of the employment contract, that he was deeply disappointed as he always tried to give his team every opportunity to succeed. He was magnificent at it. She could see why it had worked for 11 years. She stood in the center of the marble floor she had kept spotless for 3 years, and she said nothing because there was nothing yet to say, and because her father had taught her that timing was the only resource that could not be taken from you. No one spoke. No one moved. She was completely alone in the middle of that floor, and then, from the bench near the east window, the bench where delivery men sometimes waited, where no one executive ever sat, a voice said, quietly and without any performance at all, "Mr. Voss, I'd like to hear what she accessed." The man on the bench looked wrong for the lobby. That was the first thing. He wore a gray canvas jacket, worn at the elbows, and his shoes were mismatched in the laces, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that stillness was its own form of authority. Voss looked at him the way you look at something that should not be in a room. "Sir, this is an internal—" "The Pillar Services contract," the man said. He stood. He was not tall, but the room contracted when he rose. Specifically, the invoice approvals from Q2 through Q4 of last year, and this year's first quarter. I've been reviewing them. Voss's face did a complicated, rapid thing. I don't know who you are, but my name, the man said, is Richard Harrington. The lobby went silent, the way rooms go silent in the moment after something irreversible. I own this building, Richard said. I own all 14 buildings in this portfolio, and I have spent the last 3 days sitting in different parts of this one, watching how it runs, because I do that periodically, because I grew up in a city where the people who cleaned the buildings and fixed the pipes and moved the freight were invisible, and I made a decision a long time ago that I would never run a company where invisible people got hurt by people who thought they were untouchable. He reached into the inside pocket of the canvas jacket and produced a folded document. He set it on the reception desk. That's a forensic accounting summary. It details $340,000 in fraudulent billing approvals over 3 years, all signed by you. The ethics hotline report filed this morning triggered an automatic freeze on all Pillar Services payments. Your access to financial approval systems was suspended 40 minutes ago. Voss opened his mouth. This is you don't understand. There were operational considerations. Kevin, Richard said. Kevin Park stood near the back of the group. He had been standing very still, the way people stand when they are trying to calculate whether the math has finally changed. The math had changed. I need to tell you something, Kevin said. His voice was not steady, but it was clear. He told me to move her to the warehouse. He told me she was a problem. I knew what that meant, and I said yes. I should have said it yesterday, and I didn't. And I'm sorry. He looked at Jane. I'm sorry, he said again. And this time, it was only to her. Voss's composure collapsed in 3 stages, exactly as composures like his always do. First, he denied there were misunderstandings, context, complexity. Then he deflected other people had signed things. The contractor had misrepresented. He had simply approved what was presented. Then, when Richard nodded to the 2 security staff who had appeared at the lobby entrance, Voss did what men like him always do last. He begged, quietly, privately, for only a moment. But Jane saw it, and she would not forget it. Not because she was unkind, but because she wanted to remember that arrogance was always, in the end, exactly that fragile. The lobby cleared slowly. People found reasons to be elsewhere. Kevin Park remained and gave a full statement, and was told his cooperation would be considered, and walked out looking like a man who had set down something very heavy and was only now feeling where it had been pressing. Jane was standing by the window when Richard Harrington walked over to her. Up close, he looked tired, not the tiredness of a late night, the tiredness of someone who carries something chronically, who has learned to carry it so well that most people don't see it. The dog, he said. From yesterday morning. Is it all right? She looked at him. You saw that. I saw that. She was quiet for a moment. He's fine. He's in the 4th floor supply closet on a moving blanket. Something moved across Richard Harrington's face that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It was not sentimental. It was something more precise. The look of a person recognizing something they had almost forgotten about themselves. I'd like to offer you a position, he said. Facilities operations manager for the residential portfolio. It's a salaried role. The insurance package is... I have a condition, Jane said. He waited. The night staff here, all 14 buildings. I want a review of wages, benefits, and safety. And I want someone in a senior role whose job it is to make sure none of them are invisible. She paused. You said you made that decision a long time ago. I'd like to see what it looks like when it's actually a system and not just an intention. Richard Harrington was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she had gone too far. Then he said, I'd like you to design that system. 3 weeks later, the supply closet on the 4th floor was empty of dogs. The dog, whose name was officially Not a Dog I Can Keep, and unofficially Biscuit, because Daniel Harrington was 7 and had opinions, lived now in Richard's apartment, where he had very quickly located the most expensive furniture and made it his own. Daniel had been there the day Biscuit arrived. He had been running a fever that morning, the kind of mild fever that spikes without warning in small children, and he had been alone in the playroom when he had climbed up to reach something on a shelf and fallen, striking his head on the corner of the coffee table. He was unconscious for less than a minute. Biscuit had barked steadily, insistently, with total conviction until the housekeeper arrived and called for help. The doctor said it was minor. said they were fortunate someone had heard. Richard had sat in the hospital chair beside his son's bed for 4 hours that night, holding the small warm hand, listening to the child breathe, and thinking about the woman on the loading dock who had looked at a shaking, bleeding animal and chosen, at personal cost, and with full knowledge of that cost, to pick it up anyway. He thought about the things you choose to carry, and the things those choices let you keep. Jane's mother met Biscuit 6 days after the hospital visit, in the blue recliner in the treatment room, because Richard had asked if he could bring Daniel to meet her, and Daniel had refused to go anywhere without the dog. And the clinic director had said yes, because the clinic director had met Richard Harrington, and also because she had met Jane's mother and knew that joy, administered at the right moment, was its own form of medicine. Jane's mother held the dog in her lap and laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded, and Daniel sat on the chair arm and told her every single fact he knew about dogs, which was many. Jane stood in the doorway and watched this. She thought about her father mopping floors in a school building, seeing everything. She thought about the invoice cover sheet and the 6 seconds of silence and the cold marble and standing alone in the center of it. She thought about the fact that she had not been rescued. She had acted first in the dark, when no one was watching, when the math said don't. The rest had followed from that. The rest always followed from that. On the wall of the new Harrington Facilities Operations Office, beside the door, there was a small framed photograph. It was not of the building or the portfolio or the org chart. It was on a loading dock at 6:47 in the morning, gray light, a woman in a green uniform on her knees, and a small white dog with one brown ear looking up at her like she was the only certain thing in the world. Richard had taken it that morning without thinking. He had kept it without knowing why. He knew why now.